Hi guys, welcome to Tactic Devs. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at filtering data inside a ListView control. Now, filtering is one of the essential operations when it comes to navigating data of a large data set. So without further delay, let's get to the coding. Now, I already have a WPF project here, so I'll start by implementing a simple UI to demonstrate filtering. I'll first collapse this window. Okay, so here I have a grid, and within the grid I'm going to add in a list view control. I will assign its name property to my list. Then I'll set its top margin to 50 pixels. Now I'm also going to assign the list views view property, and I'm going to assign it to a grid view. Now within this grid view, I'm going to specify some grid view columns that will be based on the class that we are going to populate this list view with. So I'll do that. Right now I'm going to add in a combo box and a text box at the top here. Alright, so here I have a text box and a combo box. So this combo box will be used to select the property by which we want to filter the list. So let's say, for example, if we have an object like a user that has a name and maybe let's say country of origin, we can filter by the name or we can filter by the country of origin. So this combo box will be used to select what property we want to filter by. I'm going to assign its name property to filter by. Then this text box will be used to specify the text that we want to filter by. Okay, so I'll give it a name and I'll just type in filter text box. Okay, so right now we have the UI setup. I'll go to the project. Now I'm going to add in a class that's going to represent the data that will be used to populate this list. So I'll go to add, then class. So I'm going to name this class user, and this will be used to represent a user. Alright, so we have the class here. I'm going to change this class to a public class. Then I'm going to define 3 public properties, and these properties will be of the type string. There'll be name, country, and status. Okay, so the properties are name, country, and status. So status will be simply just maybe the status of an application, let's say whether the application is complete or pending. Then I'm going to create a constructor, and this constructor is going to get 3 parameters of the type string. Alright, so this constructor will take in 3 parameters, and these parameters will be assigned to these 3 properties here. Alright, so this user class is that every time you're creating an instance, you need to give in the name, country, and status. Okay, so I'll go back to the main window file here, and I'm going to define some grid view columns here. Okay, so the first grid view column, I'll assign its header property to name. Then I'll set the display member binding. I'll set that to a binding, and I'll bind it to the name property of the user class here. I'll do the same for the other columns. So one for country, okay, so we have the three columns defined here, and their properties will be bound based on the class, which is the user class. All right, now I'll go to the main window, the code behind. Okay, so at this point I want to populate this list view here. So I'm going to create an array of the type user, and I'll just give it a name, users, and this array will be set to a new user array. Then I'm going to add in multiple instances of the user class here. Now for the sake of speed, I'm just going to paste in the code. Alright, so here we now have an array of the type user, and I've assigned multiple instances, which are actually 20 of the user type, with random names, countries, as well as status. I'll just go ahead and collapse this. What I'm going to do here in this main window constructor, I'm going to assign the list views item source property to this very array here, this list of users. Now I named my list here as the name property of the list view, so I'll set its item source to users. Alright, so this should populate the list view with these user items here. So I'll go ahead and test the code. Alright, so the application is up and running, and we can see that this list view has been populated with some data. Okay, now the next step is I'm going to assign this combo box's item source property to a list of options that we can select, and these options will be name, country, and status. Okay, so now I gave the combo box a name of filter by. I'll set its item source to an array, a string array. So basically it's a string. Then I'm going to specify 3 strings inside this array. The first one is name, then country, lastly status. Now if we go to the main window here, now there's one thing about the combo box. By default it's going to select an empty object. It will select a no object, so we can override that behavior by specifying the selected index here, and I'll set that to 0. This simply means that when this combo box is initialized, it's going to select the first object in the list, and here we know that the first object is going to be name. So I'll just go ahead and test this. Okay, so we see that there's name here, and if I drop down, you can see we have country, status. Okay, I'll just go ahead and close this. So this is one way of setting the options on the combo box, but there's another way that we can do this. So I'm going to demonstrate that. I'll start by first commenting out this line, then I'll implement it. So I'll go filter by, then items, source. Now this time I'm going to use a statement called type of. Now what this does is it returns a type object of what we specify here. So in this case I'm going to specify user, the user class here. So I'll return the type of this user class. Now what I want to do here is I want to extract the properties that are declared in this class, and we know the properties are name, country, and status. So there's a method called get properties here, and this get properties method is going to return a list of items called property info items. Now these property info items have got the names of the properties here. Now it returns a list, which is simply an array. Now what I want is I do not want the actual property info object, I only want the name. So I'm going to implement a transformation method here. Now because it returns a list, I can simply use some link methods, and that method is the select method. Now within this select method I'm going to specify a predicate, which is simply a method. So I'll say okay, so what's happening here is I'm specifying the method of how I'm going to transform every property info object in this list, and I say this is the parameter. It will take in the property info object, and on the right side it's going to return the name. So I don't want anything else, I only want the name. So it's going to return a list of the names of the properties declared in this class. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and test the code. Alright, and we can see the application works just fine. It returns the names and sets them as the options of the combo box. Okay. Now that being done, the next step is to implement the filtering. I'll start by getting rid of this statement. You can still use that one, it's fine. Okay, now the list view, which is the my list, has got a property called the items property here. Now this items property is actually an item collection object, and it inherits from the collection view class, which allows us to set filters, and it also allows us to do things like sorting and grouping. So we can specify a specific filter by setting the filter property, which takes in a predicate. Now a predicate is just a method. It's like a normal function method. Now the predicate is a method that takes in an object and then returns a Boolean value. So that method, the predicate, is used to determine whether an object should be included or excluded from a collection. So in this case I'm just going to assign it, let's say name filter. Now because I haven't specified this method anywhere, so it gives that red line there. Now with the help of Visual Studio I can generate the method. So I'll just go to quick actions, then I'll generate the method. Okay, so we see here that Visual Studio has generated a method. Now this is just simply a method. It will return a Boolean value and it will take in an object. So we can implement some logic here to determine whether this object should be included or excluded from the collection. Now we know that the object that's going to be passed in this method is actually a user object. So I'll go ahead and implement this. So I'm going to say create a variable and I'll give it a name filter object. Obj is equal to the object that was passed here, but this time I'm going to cast this object to a user object because I know that we are going to be filtering user objects. Okay, now once that is done, I'm going to return a Boolean value. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get this object, which is the filter, and I'm going to select its name property. Now because name is a string, I'm going to run a function called contains. So this will return true or false when a specific string is contained within the name property. So here I can specify a string to check whether that string is contained within the name. Now the string I'm going to provide here will come from the text box that we declared in the UI here, which is this one here, and I gave it a name called filter text box. So just copy that, then I'll paste, and then I'll take the text property. Okay, now I'm also going to specify another parameter on this contains method, and that's the string comparison. I'll set it to ordinal ignore case. So what this does is it ignores whether the text that I gave in this method is uppercase or lowercase. It doesn't care as long as it just looks for the specific string. Okay, now this is our filter, and we set that filter, we set the items filter property to this name filter. Now if we leave it like that, it only means that we can only filter by name. We can't filter by country or status. So we need to create two more filters, and we also need to find a way of selecting the right filter based on the option that is clicked on the combo box here. So if we click name, we should filter by name. If it's country, by country. So I'll start first by copying this method, then I'll paste it twice. Okay, so I'll change this to country filter, and this time we'll be taking the country property and checking whether it contains specific text. I'll do the same for this one, status. Okay, so we have 3 filter methods here. Now we also need to implement some logic to determine which filter to use, whether name or status or country, based on the selected option. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write another method, say public. Then this method is going to return either one of these filter methods. So to return a method, I'll simply return a predicate. Okay, and I'll specify that this predicate takes in an object, because the methods we are using here take in objects as their parameters. So I'll do the same, and I'll give it a name, get filter. Okay, so this method here will determine which filter to get, whether the name filter, country, or status. So I'm going to use a switch statement inside this method, and this switch statement will look for the selected option on the combo box. Now I gave the combo box a name, which is filter by. So I'll get the selected item. Now we know that it's a string, so I'll cast it to a string Okay, so the switch statement will compare this string. So in the first case, so if the string, if the item selected is name, then return the name filter method. Okay, name filter. Okay, I'll copy this, paste it twice. Okay, so if it's country that's selected, then return country Okay, just a quick recap here. So a predicate is simply a function, and this predicate takes in an object, and we know that the functions specified here take in object as their parameters, and we can actually return these methods, these predicates. So in this switch statement, we check whether it's the name, country, or status selected, then we return the corresponding filter method. Okay, so here I'm going to return. Now what happens here is, in case you haven't selected name, country, or status, we need to return a default filter. Now we know that the code won't even come as far as this, so I'll just write in name filter. That would be the default filter, but we know that it's either name, country, or status. Okay, so here we are not going to specify our filter to a specific constant one. We are going to specify that to the get filter method here, and that will determine which filter to use. So I'll go ahead and get rid of this. Now what I'm going to do here is, if we look at the main window here, now I want to change the filter or update the filter every time the selection here is changed or when the text here is changed. So I'm going to implement some event handlers. For the text box is text changed event, and the combo box is selection changed event. Okay, so you can see the handlers here. Okay, so writing an if statement. So if the text box, which is the filter text box, if the text is no, meaning if there is nothing, if it's empty, we're going to set the my list items. We'll set the filter to no. Simply, we're not going to specify any filter. Else, we can set the filter and we'll specify the get filter method, and this filter will determine, this get filter method will determine which filter to get based on the selected option, like we implemented earlier on. Now if the selection is changed, I would also want to refresh the filter. So I'll just get this. Okay, so when the selection is changed, set the filter and update it based on the new selection. Okay, so that should do it. So I'll go ahead and test this application to see the filtering. All right, so the application is up and running. So I'll just go ahead and test. So I'll try to filter. So I'll filter by theme, and you can see it filters out. Then I'll try by, okay, so it filters by name. I'll select country. I'll try India. You can see it filters by India, South Korea, okay, and United States. Okay, then I'll change the option to status. Then I'll type in PN pending, and we can only see pending. Then I'll try complete, and we can see complete. You can change it to name, and it updates the filter based on the new selection. So that's it, guys, for today's video.